Welcome, welcome, welcome to all the critics, skeptics, and anyone who's ever had an opinion. Welcome to another episode of Campus Debate Season 2 by the Debate Association of Kenya. Tonight, we are gathered with amazing teams and amazing universities ready to debate their second preliminary round, which means the team that wins gets 3 points and the team that loses gets 0 points. Campus Debates is a show where we get to interact about things that affect me, affect you, and anyone else that has ever existed within society, and the most pressing issues that I know you're thinking about and want to find a solution to. With that, we welcome Pioneer International University as proposition, and we welcome Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology as opposition. I will allow the debaters a few seconds to introduce themselves and tell us something interesting about them. One thing you might notice is that you have seen these faces before in the shows that have existed prior. They've been able to make it to the second half of Campus Debate Season 2, and I think that deserves congratulations for them. Proposition, you may introduce yourselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Martin Javan from Pioneer International University, the only unbeaten international university and unbeaten team in this entire tournament, hoping to make that a third streak.
Hi guys, my name is Ndolo. I am a serial winner. I have friends who are losers, but they're on the other end.
Fun fact about the speakers that have just introduced themselves: they are not the only unbeaten team. We have Strathmore University as well that has been able to win all their rounds ever since we began campus debates. But I know the confidence that they hold within themselves, they might just actually win this round. But hang around so that you can see. Opposition.
Hi, my name is George Kiritu. Fun fact about me, I am a Pan-Africanist. So that means you'll see some of my debates, if not most, featuring levels to which I advocate that Africans stop hating themselves and come together.
Hi everyone, my name is Leon Agola from JKUAT. I happen to be a friend of serial winners, and I hope some of that bleeds on to our team tonight. Thank you.
For opposition, they hope that their association with winners will actually grant them a win for tonight. I do not know whether you agree with that statement or not. Feel free to comment on X at KTN Home, Campus Debates, and with that, we allow the judges to introduce themselves.
Hi guys, my name is Mary Wairimo. I'm a young economist, and fun fact, I think my heart is hurting because I love you all.
All right, my name is Brian Mwindi. The last time you were here, I told you I was practicing how to sing, and I have 2 lines for you. They say they've never seen a pretty guy from Kenya. See me now, and this is what they prefer. Okay, we hope to have a very interesting debate, and yes, all the best to the winning team.
Hi everyone, my name is Wycliffe Otieno. I'll be the chair for this round. I'm the more serious one. I'm the more important person here. Don't worry about these people who are singing, but I'm looking forward to a very interesting round. To the friends of the winners and to the friends of the losers, let's see who gets home to tell that story tonight. Thank you.
The judges are ready. As musicians or as artists and economic enthusiasts, and as well the serious judge at the center, they are ready for an engaging debate from Pioneer University and Jomo Kenyatta University. With that, the motion for this round reads: this House believes that police forces should be subject to greater civilian oversight to prevent incidents of police brutality. I'll read that again. This House believes that police forces should be subject to greater civilian oversight to prevent incidences of police brutality. Do you think that you can actually hold your police accountable for their actions by actively being present in regards to every single action that they particularly do? From side proposition and side opposition, they're here to argue whether you can monitor police and prevent police brutality in totality. With that, we welcome first speaker proposition to start off their argument. Here.
George Floyd, black man who died with the knee of a 300-pound man pressing against his neck. Let's come closer to home. Brian Mwindi, a young budding artist who is leaving the studio very late in the evening, meets John Mwendwa, a corrupt police officer who chooses to assume that Mwendwa is carrying an RPG in the bag that he is carrying. So what happens? By the time the officer realizes that it is simply a guitar, he has already inflicted physical harm to Mwindi. We shall concede to two things. One, that the state carries monopoly of power and monopoly of violence. What this simply means is that the state is mandated to use a bit of force to carry out its mandate, and that power extends to police officers as well, because sometimes it is necessary force to carry out that mandate that we have given them to protect the civilians of this country. Secondly, we will concede that sometimes this necessary force becomes a bit too much and sometimes leads to physical harm and to the most extreme death of these individuals or the victims that these police officers are trying to police. What we do not agree to, panel, what we do not agree to, audience at home, is that these police officers who carry out such acts of brutality should go away unscathed. That is the one thing that we do not agree to, and that is the heart of this motion. Why do we say this? Panel, in a normal world, John Mwendwa will be taken to court, and what will happen is, during that period of persecution, for some reason, his case will disappear. So there is no justice served to the individuals. In some instances, John Mwendwa's case will not even get to court, because Brian Mwindi is of the notion that even if I take this case to court, nothing will happen. John Mwendwa will go unscathed. He will simply get a slap on the wrist, and then everything goes on as normal. The justification, panel, for allowing more civilian involvement in such cases is very simple. Civilians have democratically given up their power to the state through a democratic elective process. And therefore, the state has a mandate to protect these individuals. However, in this case, it is a state that is actively harming the individuals through its own hands. So what then happens is that the individuals and the civilians are justified in having this power back just as a checking mechanism for the power that they have given to these entities. And therefore, panel, we think that in and of itself is a justified enough reason for us to allow more civilian involvement in such cases. Before I even go to what that looks like, I know the friends of the winners will come and tell us that there is going to be an inclusiveness of bias from these civilians, because of course we know there's already a very thin line between how we deal with police officers and civilians. So we already see a very high level of aggression between the two entities. So what is going to happen, and especially what is going to come from side opposition, is they're going to argue a cycle of violence that is going to come about once we involve this, because they're going to think about a bias that is going to be introduced. We concede to that bias, and we actually agree, and we want that bias to exist. The reason why is because the alternative to the bias is death and physical violence to individuals. What we think happens with a bias, panel, is that from our own system, the system that we'll bring to you, is you'll realize with more civilian involvement, that doesn't particularly mean that the justice system does not work. There's already a checking mechanism, which is already the justice system, that is going to exist to check the bias that is going to be introduced. Alternatively to that, panel, if we do not have that system, if we do not have that checking mechanism, that means we are particularly allowing John Mwendwa to go free. We're not giving Brian Mwindi the justice that he deserves. And we don't think that is fair. The checking mechanism panel is something as simple as the currently existing Independent Policing Oversight Authority of Kenya. We think this entity in and of itself, being given the mandate to actively instigate prosecutions against police officers who have been charged with police brutality, is something that's very important. Understand, IPOA exists independent of the police force, independent of the state. This is a body of civilians who have been tasked with oversighting police actions. We therefore think they are the best body for such actions that we want to take, i.e. including more civilians inside of such cases as a checking mechanism. We think we do not have enough money to introduce a completely new body and do elections and all that. So we're simply using the already existing system to beat out the individuals who think that they can beat the system. So by using IPOA to actively prosecute, or rather to start prosecutions against police officers who've been charged with police brutality, we think this gives back power to the individuals, back power to the civilians who have actively been harmed by police brutality. So this brings in two things. One, we'll actually see a very huge increase of trust in the current judicial system. What we see right now is a mistrust of the judicial system, and that means civilians are not comfortable taking these cases to court, and at a point where that even happens, there isn't significant prosecution happening against these police officers. By allowing IPOA to actually instigate these prosecutions, what that then means is that more justice will be served. Probably not all the cases will be solved, but a significant amount, enough to restore hope back into the justice system. We think the principle of deterrence is something that's very important and will come into existence as opposed to current checking mechanisms like body cams. We don't think those ones work enough. We think at a point where the police are seeing an active threat to them being prosecuted by the power that they already have been taken away from them, we think this is something very significant and it's something we buy into.
Amazing argument from side proposition, because according to them, they think we should actively give justice to Brian Mwindi by actually offering accountability mechanisms to the police people, for example, John Mwendwa. With that, we welcome first speaker opposition to engage with proposition's argument and start off their case. Here.
Before I begin, let me be clear. There is no place in an evolved democracy such as ours. There is no place for police brutality. As such, we as the citizenry should always call out such instances, and we should always be on the lookout for such things happening. In an evolved democracy such as ours, this cannot be the case, and it needs to end. That being said, we're still here to oppose why there needs to be greater civilian oversight in terms of prevention of incidences of police brutality. First things first, we need to recognize that IPOA as a body has existed since 2011. This is something that has already been there. And their duties are limited to carrying out independent investigations within policing systems and giving out recommendations as to what could happen in terms of any corrective measures that they have. Therefore, when the motion says that there needs to be greater civilian oversight, what this implies, therefore, is that bodies such as IPOA need to be given more power in terms of how they're going to exercise their duties. Because as we've seen, this is a body that has existed since 2011. We still have cases of police brutality happening every single time here in Kenya. Therefore, we believe that greater civilian oversight means that these civilian oversight bodies actually have the funding and the power to not only recommend prosecution, but to actually carry out prosecutions in and of themselves. And that is something that was not captured by the proposers. As such bodies also make recommendations about ways in which policing systems can change, and certain times they even have the authority to carry out discipline measures within the police force. As such, why do we want to oppose this? First of all, we need to understand policing systems, and most of the time the targets of cases of police brutality. For the most part, it's usually people who are of a lower social class. It's the poor, it's if you're talking about a case of the US, it's black people because socially and politically they're the people who are the lower classes. As such, they're especially targeted by unfair policing systems. Therefore, you'll find unfair arrests, you'll find violence being meted out against protesters who most of the time are poor people and whatnot. And the problem with, and in terms of, with oversight bodies, you will therefore find that there's already an existing anti-police sentiment within the status quo. Therefore, if we are going to the civilians to get people from the civilians to come in and constitute these oversight bodies, the problem is if you're going to the people to whom this violence is being meted out to, they come in with anti-police sentiments already within them because they're especially targeted due to their status in the society. And therefore, some of the proposals that they might recommend in terms of correcting the police force could be seen as overcorrection. They could call for defunding of police systems, and they could even be calling for radical changes in policing systems. Now, the problem with that is this. It's twofold. One, civilians in and of themselves do not have any frontline experience as to what the police officers go through. Now, most of the time when we're seeing police do their work, we rarely get a frontline view of what it is they go through on a day-to-day basis. We simply pass the traffic officer on the side. Some of us, luckily enough, will never even go into the homicide section of the police station. So therefore, we do not actually see some of the people, the deranged individuals that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. The problem with clips of police being violent towards people is that it simply reinforces any anti-police sentiment that already exists within us. Therefore, we go in and we say, remove all the funds, take all the weapons, restructure the entire system as is, without considering what this might actually mean for the police officer. Because, truth be told, I've never had to stand in front of a crowd that's coming towards me at the risk of losing my life. And as such, I will not have any perspective as to what it is, the kind of danger that I face. Therefore, asking me, a civilian, to therefore go in with already anti-police sentiments that exist because I am a young person and I am especially a target for the police officers, I'll just go in and say, you know what, just remove those guns away from them and remove all of those things away from them. Not realizing that in reality, I'm not the only person who they're going to be dealing with. They're dealing with a varied array of individuals. And therefore, we feel that if we're having people who already have anti-police sentiments within these groups, it's simply going to take away from the police officers. So there exists an opt-out. Why not just take people who are not especially targeted by these people? Here's the problem, though. They are not the targets of police brutality. As such, they go in with a lack of perspective as to just how violent these things can get. Therefore, when it comes to them giving out recommendations, we now see cases of undercorrection. For example, they really won't go out of their way to say that we actually need to edit some of the policing systems that exist. Why? Because these are not individuals who are especially targeted in terms of policing systems. What we would say is that there needs to be a change in terms of how police forces deal with individuals. We need to now change them from a police force to actually a police service because they're going to be in service of the population that exists. This therefore means that even if there are people who are going to be, how do I put it? The only problem is that for people who are going to be especially victims of this violence, these are people who will already have anti-police sentiment within them, and they won't have the best interests of the police officers at heart anyway. So we've not solved any situation, and in the end, we have a faulty police system leading to even more crimes and generally a bad society. With that, I rest my case.
Side opposition's argument is that they think that the oversight bodies that already exist have sufficient power, and they do not think that if you increase the power, it would lessen the idea of police brutality existing. What they think would happen is that they would have this whole idea of anti-police sentiments actually frolicking societies or dominating these particular societies as a whole. I think it's been an engaging first half of this particular debate where side proposition and opposition argue whether we need to give civilian bodies more power to actively watch over what police do to prevent police brutality from maximizing or existing within societies. With that, we'll be going on a short commercial break, and when we are back, we'll get to hear further arguments from both teams as to what they believe in regards to this motion. See you in a few minutes. Half of Campus Debate Season 2. The teams that are joining us for this night are Pioneer University and Jomo Kenyatta University. The argument that they are currently making is centered around the whole idea for whether we need to actively give civilians more power to watch over police and their actions in order to reduce police brutality from existing within society. If you missed the first half of the debate, propositions argue that this justification for civilians to actively be involved in this particular act. And side opposition argue that the whole idea of anti-police sentiment existing from involving civilians is going to maximize and exist. And I think these are really solid arguments, but with that, we welcome the second speaker proposition to further analyze as to whether they believe that civilians should indeed be given more power to watch over police. Hear, hear.
Simple responses, and why side opposition is already out of this motion. Once you say that most likely police brutality is needed in scenarios such as protest, when you need to defend the state against scenarios such as anarchy, you can't come and make the same principle concession and say it's justified for you, it's not justified for the police force to use brutal force. Then it means what you're saying here does not match what you're saying here. It's heavily contradictory. But let's engage them either way. We think there's justification that lots and lots of the people who face police brutality do not buy into the criminal justice system. We think the biggest people who suffer police brutality are not people who are just walking around or people who are just normal or in mandamanos. The biggest people who suffer from police brutality are people who are heavily innocent. You're walking around, the police stops you, you do not want to stop because you do not have any reason. The police beat you up, you're left with a broken eye, broken hand, and there's nothing you can do about it. The reason this exists is because they have enough power as the police within the system, the judicial system, to prosecute, to ensure that they collect evidence, to ensure that they do all these things. We think to the point it becomes judge, executioner, and jury, it's bad for the rest of the people. Any source of power that needs to be accumulated to the victim cannot be accumulated. We think that is bad. The reason this is bad is you get to have sentiments such as people are against the police, they're not willing to agree with what the police are doing. Even if you bring them to have this oversight, they'll have these biases. We think that is bad for them because of the actions of the police. You just don't wake up tomorrow and say, I hate Mwendwa, I hate someone else. They need to have done something for you to hate. Now, we need to break the two problems that exist here. One, which is this sentiment happening in society and how society gets better, gets free of this sentiment. But secondly, how this police brutality, with the amount of power they have in systems, can be broken free. We think this can only exist through oversight, civilian oversight potential, and that's what we are saying. We think it's unjustified for me as a police to beat you up. At the point that you do not have any weapon, you do not have any ability to cause harm, why should I beat you up? I can just arrest you, have been trained in the right way. Why do I need to use excessive force, yet you know I can just do it in a simple way? That's the question we need to resolve. Why our oversight is important and resolve this is working in two ways. One, the idea that you have civilians having more power in terms of prosecution of these police officers forces them to reduce whatever harms they do in society and get better. The reason this is most likely true is because if you know the power that comes to your execution is not in your hands, it will most likely change. This is why in the families, if you go and lamba sukari and your mother is the one beating you, you will stop from lamba sukari. But most likely, if you're the one who buys the sugar, who leaks the sugar, there's nothing that anything can do to you. We are showing you that this oversight, this power is taken away from them to the civilian. Now, when the civilian has these biases, the police need to change, the police need to get better. If they don't do it, these same biases have enough power to convict them and put them in prisons. We don't think there's anyone in their normal senses who'd want to be in this prison. The second justification for this is simple. Most likely this police will do this out of spite of, out of the idea that I have this power, there's nothing that Mwendo or Ndolo can do. At the point that Ndolo or Mwendo has this power, they're most likely forced to change because they know their repercussions do not work for them. The repercussions are way worse for them and place them in the same scenarios that they could place someone else who did not have power. But thirdly, we think these minorities that side opposition is trying to defend are most likely better placed in the world for two reasons. They can be part of these oversight committees. They are part of the people who are the biggest victims of such problems of police brutality, and in such scenarios, they are able to make changes to the system. We think the system is what is the biggest problem. So if they are part of the system, most likely the changes need to have enough impact in the system. It's not just you walking around in the streets saying it's bad for police to beat people. It needs to be effective towards the same police to the point that they can suffer consequences for doing these actions. This ensures that you trust the CJS system to protect you as an individual, but secondly, you trust that the police would get better. The police are more friendly to me. The police become a service rather than a force. They become something that I'm willing to go speak to them without suffering consequences. We think if we achieve all these impacts, most likely you do not have the same sentiments that are telling you people are anti-police. But secondly, you do not have enough violence, or you do not have violence in these spaces because there's that respect of property and there's that respect of engagement in human rights, and we think it's justified. But the biggest harm you get, the biggest impact you get from us compared to the world is it's rather for you to have a police officer or someone from a system that has suffered, has caused so much harm to suffer, than someone who's innocent, who has no defense to suffer. We are willing to bite the bullet in our world. We rest.
Proposition has made their case with their first two speeches. With that, we welcome the second speaker, opposition, to engage and possibly extend their case. Hear, hear.
We've talked about songs. So, as has been tradition, I'll plug my friend Thairu, Thairu. Listen to him on SoundCloud or Spotify. Another artist that I find is very relevant for today's speech is Fela Kuti. Should listen to his song Zombie. Long live the Kalakuta commune. If a police officer has heard that, you know what I mean. Panel, I think there's a misunderstanding of how there's a misunderstanding on side proposition. You have the state exists. The state wants to carry out acts of brutality. It does it through police officers. So why then are we as civilians asking that we engage the police rather than the state itself? Because at the end of the day, it is the state that is directing the police officers to actually engage in these acts of violence. So my question here is, why then would we trust that the state can set up a body of civilian oversight that can that can check police officers to a good degree? To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Firstly, we've seen, for example, that police officers do not care about the justice system. They think that they are the law and they think that they are above the law. For example, we've had recently the case of the principal magistrate, Monica Kivuti, being shot by a police officer that is Chief Inspector Samson Kipchirchir Kipruto, right? So the idea here is, at the end of the day, who is supposed to be responsible for actually ensuring that for example, the justice system works very well, that it ensures that it can actually push back against the police? It is the state. Panel, when we direct conversations away from the government and talking about how civilians can place pressure on the government to ensure that they recruit better people, they train police officers better, and we go towards now talking about civilian oversight for the police officers, we lose the plot. Firstly, they came in and talked about greater oversight. For them, greater oversight looks like prosecution. Prosecution isn't preventing police brutality, it is responding to police brutality. You have to know that first and foremost. I would have expected them to come in and say that, oh, you know, if we have this situation of civilian oversight, the going to they come up with better rules on training police officers. They're going to come up with better rules on recruitment of police officers. Such kind of things that ensure that there are actual preventative policies. Instead, they wasted 14 minutes of speech here talking about prosecution. Panel, we don't think that's relevant for today's debate. Now, let's note, who is actually responsible for training police officers? It is the government. For example, right now, where does the government of Kenya seek training for police officers? It looks towards states like Israel. What then do you expect? Police brutality is going to be an obvious outcome of how the police behave and function in society. Panel, we think that pressure, right, of civilian oversight, that engagement of the civilians and the citizens, it is necessary to direct it towards government. And you're going to lose a lot of that energy when you're going to just focus entirely on the police officers who are protected by the state. Right? So the idea here is you're having the state saying, let's pit civilians versus police officers, and then we see how that works out. It's not going to result in decreased police brutality. It instead is going to just result in civilians becoming lost, right? So that's one of the things we need to talk about. Also, I don't understand how, for example, this would work with this whole idea of sending police officers to Haiti, right? Already we're in the second scramble of Africa, and there is the whole issue of divide and conquer. So, of course, America has to utilize Kenya as its puppet and send police officers to Haiti. So the idea here is, how is civilian oversight going to apply for police officers being sent to Haiti? And again, it's very relevant. Why? Because we're talking about Kenyan police officers being utilized in foreign lands. How is civilian oversight going to be utilized there? There, we're going to have even more of a need for our government to be responsible in choosing the right people to send to Haiti, right? Training them well, and et cetera, et cetera. We don't see those kind of points being given from side proposition. But before I continue, shoot.
Simple question. You want us to deal with the state. Where exactly does state power come from? Refer to my speech. And then, how does your world solve police brutality?
Again, if you're going to come here and talk about the state has monopoly over violence, then what are we going to talk about? Are we going to deal with the violence itself and the people who have the monopoly over violence? It's pretty simple. It's the civilians who are supposed to engage the police officers, because at the end of the day, if you want to deal with the problem, you don't deal with the puppet, deal with the puppet master. It just makes more sense. Already, there exist systems in place for civilian oversight, like IPOA. Does IPOA have anything to brag about in terms of we've had a success here or a success there, that they can come in and say, okay, we've done this much, but we're limited by the capacity we have. Therefore, we are requesting that we have more in terms of capacity development and things like that. No, barely most of Kenyans don't even know what IPOA is, right? So the idea here is that this whole idea of civilian oversight is a failure and is in fact a distraction. We're supposed to engage the government directly. For example, this whole idea of, I've dealt with that. So when it comes to civilians actually having an impact on what training looks like, what recruitment looks like, and the like, do you actually think that those kinds of powers of determining what training and what recruitment looks like is going to be given to civilian oversight bodies? No. Therefore, what are you preventing in the first place? With that, I rest my case. I don't know if we're the team of losers or whatever, but at least I've said my speech.
What a wonderful second half of the debate that we've had in regards to actively giving civilian oversight greater power to act as a checking mechanism for police in order to prevent police brutality. A question to our lovely audience: do you think that the only way to actively stop police brutality is to increase civilian oversight? Or do you think that oversight needs to be given, instead of to the police, to the state in and of itself, because the state is what is mandating in regards to what the police do and things like that. Feel free to engage with us on X at KTN Home with the hashtag Campus Debates and have a lovely conversation with us. Let us know what you think. What is the best measure to actively stop police brutality from continuing within status quo? With that, we'll be going on a short commercial break, and after a few minutes, we'll be back with the responses from the judges and the declaration for who has won and who has. Thank you for choosing to hang around for Campus Debates Season 2, this particular episode where we have Pioneer University debating against Jomo Kenyatta University. What has gone on in the first and the second half of the debate? The teams have argued as to which preventive measure necessarily exists for police brutality to reduce within societies. And with that, I will allow the judges, because they are not yet convinced by the speakers, to ask a question to proposition and opposition that will lead to them determining their verdict. Judges?
My question goes to the proposition bench. What does greater civilian oversight look like? And in that, who persecutes them? Are they themselves, are they the civilians themselves, or do they go back to the state for persecution?
All right, my question goes to side opposition. You say that it is the state that is meant to protect both the police officer and the people. Case scenario, a magistrate is being shot by a police officer. Who is the state in this context?
Amazing questions from the judges. For side opposition, the question is, when it comes to the idea that state has control or power over these police structures and things like that, what happens then when the police actively perform police brutality towards someone who's part of this state in and of itself? Then for side proposition, the question is that, what does civilian oversight ideally look like, and what measures would ideally exist to counter police brutality as a whole? With that, we give them 1 minute each to respond to the judges. Proposition, you have the floor. Here, here.
Chair, what greater oversight looks like according to side proposition is the ability to prosecute. The reason we're pushing for the ability to prosecute is, even without the highest rates of convictions, you already create a higher rate of prosecution as a pattern to create change. Secondly, the response to power. We think power resides in the hands of the people. The state is just someone who is there to represent these ideas. That's why eventually they still come back to you to ask you to vote for them. But thirdly, as a response to who controls this power, simple responses to this: the ability to recruit, the ability to train, etc. doesn't make sense if you constantly have people responding and saying, this police you're bringing into society have a problem. If you create such a large number of prosecutions towards them, you create enough agency for the state to make changes and decide this is what needs to get better, this is what we need to improve on recruitment, this is what we need to improve better on training. We think that can only exist through a wall. And the reason this exists is, if the people who you're trying to defend or you're trying to get power from are constantly against you guys, then there's no way you can beat them. There's no way you can constantly have these issues. Most likely they will vote you out. They don't care about you. But secondly, even if they don't vote you out, they will create patterns, or they will not subscribe to your ideas, to your policies, and you're creating a state that has enough resistance from its own people. We think that is bad for them.
Who is the state in this case? It is both. It is both the officer and it is the judge. Remember, the very first concession that Prop gives is that the state has the monopoly of power and violence. Therefore, in fact, the very first example that he uses when he talks about prosecution is that Brian Mwindi's case is going to disappear in the courts anyway. So why do we do this? So even if you're giving them the ability to prosecute, what is it going to change? All it's going to do is putting people who are anti-police in those bodies. Secondly, it's not going to work because the very system they're talking about is already incentivized to protect itself, the police officers. So we don't see how that is going to make any sense. Because remember, Prosecution, as opposition said, is one, a response to police brutality. It is not a way of mitigating it. Secondly, they're simply going back to the very same system that they said is incentivized to protect themselves. So even if we give them the power to prosecute, fine, there you have it. These people are still going to go back. And then they say that prosecution is going to create this whole wave where people are, the police officers are going to start behaving all of a sudden. IPOA has been there since 2011, giving recommendations for police officers to be prosecuted. That in itself has not even given the government initiative to say, here's the power to prosecute. What is the assurance that even if they do have the power to prosecute, that anything is going to happen? Since 2011, IPOA has been there, existing, in our status quo, giving out recommendations for prosecutions. Nothing has changed. Up to as late as a month ago, there was someone getting beaten up by police officers within cells simply because he aggravated a police officer. So let us remember this. If we want to deal with the problem of police brutality, here is the truth. We need to go to the very source of it, and it is the state. It is not the police officers, it is not the civilians. This conversation has to be about changing the state from within. With that, we rest our case.
Amazing, amazing arguments from proposition and opposition, both of them defending what it is they're here to defend on. As an audience and as people who are watching us tonight, I hope either team was able to sway you. And before we get a verdict from the judges, it would be amazing if you tweet and let us know which team convinced you in regards to whether police brutality would be reduced in proposition side or opposition side. Tweet on X at KTN Home with the hashtag Campus Debates. And with that, welcome our judges to give us their verdict.
Thank you so much. So the judges are finally convinced that there's only one winner, and I'm going to announce that in a short while. So today's debate was simple. Proposition side was supposed to tell us what greater civilian oversight looks like, or why that greater civilian oversight, especially with the bias, will prevent police brutality, and opposition was supposed to rather tell us why not have a greater civilian oversight. Is it that we remain with what we have in status quo, or do we have a lesser oversight, or do we do away in totality with what we have in status quo, and how this has a ripple effect on the incidence of police brutality? So cases we got from proposition side are that this greater civilian oversight, and this is a direct response from the question that Mary asks, that greater civilian oversight involves the power, or involves the power to actually prosecute. But what proposition argue in their case, first of all, from the first speaker, they tell you that there's an issue with the criminal justice system where they don't trust these people to be the judge, jury, and all that. And the second speaker tells you that, you know what, that when you actually give this power for the civilians to actually prosecute these people, you're giving them a power to trust the criminal justice system, or to assure that police actually are charged with all of this. What you get in opposition, on the other hand, is that they tell you that, one, we need to go directly to the puppet master. The problem is not necessarily the police officer who's doing the brutality, but it's largely the state. And they bring in by telling you that, one, the state not training the police officers well, the state not recruiting the police officers well, the state not being actively involved in these changes or in these reforms is what is the problem. The existence of civilian oversight, which both sides of the House concede to through IPOA, already tells you that even if you have a greater civilian oversight, which is in the motion by default, it won't necessarily solve these problems, because you still go back to the state. So the state don't necessarily solve this issue. So the direct response you also get from Leon is that they tell you that the power to prosecute won't solve this issue of police brutality, and that these people will still go back. So what opposition side argue in this debate is that there is no need for a greater civilian oversight. To what extent necessarily, not their words directly, but to what extent necessarily will this greater civilian oversight solve or prevent incidents of police brutality? We need to go directly to the state. We need to find the problem there, because IPOA has been in existence for since wherever. If we are still not going to be able to prosecute these criminals, even if we prosecute them themselves, we go back to the criminal justice system, which is by the state. The problem won't solve. They won't prosecute themselves. Incidents of police brutality will still increase. So on that marginal argument, the panel were largely convinced that the opposition side win this round and the proposition side lost. Thank you.
We now appreciate the judges for the amazing verdict that they've given unto us, where we have opposition winning above proposition. And I think the tables have turned. So now proposition no longer become the friends or the winners themselves, but side opposition now become the friends to losers, and they become the winners for this round. So congratulations to Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology for being able to win this round. They have been able to gather for themselves an additional 3 points, and with that, it places them at 7 points as per their other rounds, and I think it's amazing for JKUAT University to win this particular round. On the other hand, Pioneer International University, for once, has met their match, and they've been able to lose this round, which means they're still going to stand at 6 points, regardless of the rounds that they've been able to win from the other preliminary rounds. Hopefully, we'll get to see them at the quarterfinals, but if we do not, I think they've had a really good run so far. Let us know as an audience, do you think that the judges swayed you in regards to the call that they made for whether opposition has actively won over proposition, or whether we need to change the verdict as per what our audience has suggested? And finally, I think police brutality has been a rising crime existing within society, and we need to actively have checking mechanisms for our police system as a whole. We need to be able to trust the CJS system to prosecute people who actively participate in police brutality as a whole. And as a civilian, I urge you to comment, to share, or to tweet on different social media sites whenever you experience police brutality existing, so that you can hold these people accountable for their actions. That has been the show tonight, Campus Debate Season 2, with Pioneer University debating against Jomo Kenyatta University. It's been engaging, it's been fun, and it's been interesting. Hopefully the next time you see us, we'll be having our quarterfinals round with the teams that qualify to the other rounds. See you next week on Monday at 8.